The first sign came as a whisper in the quantum communication networks that spanned the galaxy. Deep space monitoring stations picked up anomalous readings from the void between spiral arms, where nothing should exist except empty darkness and the occasional wandering asteroid. The readings were dismissed as equipment malfunctions, cosmic radiation interference, or the dying echoes of ancient stellar explosions. They were wrong. Admiral Vextar of the Galactic Council Navy stood before the massive holographic display in the command center of Station Omega 7, watching the impossible unfold before his 6 eyes. The display showed a three-dimensional map of the galaxy, with thousands of green dots representing council worlds, blue dots marking trade routes, and red indicators showing areas of concern. But now, at the very edge of known space, a cluster of white dots had appeared overnight. White meant unknown contacts, unidentified vessels that didn't match any known signature in the Council's vast database. "Status report," Vextar commanded, his forearms clasped behind his back in a gesture that conveyed both authority and unease. His species, the Zelanti, had served as military commanders for the Council for over 3,000 years, and his battle-scarred carapace told the story of countless victories against pirates, rebels, and the occasional uprising on rimworlds. Lieutenant Commander Yera, a pale blue humanoid from the ice world of Kirian, manipulated the holographic controls with trembling fingers. "Sir, we've confirmed 47 distinct energy signatures approaching from galactic northeast. They're maintaining perfect formation and traveling at..." "This can't be right." "What can't be right?" Vextar's voice carried the edge that had made hardened space marines step carefully around him. "They're exceeding maximum theoretical velocity for any known propulsion system. Our fastest dreadnoughts can achieve 0.7 light speed in normal space. These contacts are maintaining 0.95 light speed and showing no signs of deceleration stress." Vextar moved closer to the display, studying the approaching formation. The ships moved with a precision that spoke of advanced coordination systems. But there was something else, something that made his combat instincts scream warnings. "Have you run their signatures against the database?" "Multiple times, sir. No matches found in any historical records. The energy patterns don't correspond to any known alien technology from the past 5,000 years. 5,000 years. The number hung in the air like an accusation. Every being in the command center knew what had happened 5,000 years ago, though it was rarely spoken of in polite society. The Great Cleansing, they called it in the official histories. The necessary action. The final solution to the human problem. Vextar had studied the ancient records as part of his military education. Humanity had been a young species, barely 1,000 years into their space age when they encountered the Galactic Council. They should have been grateful to be invited into the galactic community, should have accepted their place as junior members and learned from their betters. Instead, they had proven to be aggressive, unpredictable, and dangerously innovative. The humans had refused to accept limitations on their expansion. They colonized worlds without permission, developed military technologies that threatened the established order, and, worst of all, they inspired other young species to question Council authority. When diplomatic pressure failed to contain them, the Council had been forced to take more direct action. The war had lasted 50 years and cost millions of lives on both sides. But, in the end, human stubbornness had proven to be their downfall. They refused to surrender even when defeat was certain, fought to the last man and woman on every world, and forced the Council to make an unprecedented decision. Complete extermination. Every human world had been sterilized. Every human colony ship had been hunted down and destroyed. Earth itself had been rendered uninhabitable, its surface scoured clean by orbital bombardment and biological weapons that ensured nothing could ever live there again. The humans and their works had been erased so completely that within a generation, many species had begun to question whether they had ever existed at all. "Sir," Yera's voice interrupted his thoughts. "The lead vessels are slowing. They've dropped to sub-light speed and are broadcasting something on multiple frequencies. Put it on speakers." The command center filled with static for a moment, then resolved into a clear transmission. The voice that emerged was unmistakably human, speaking the ancient language that had been forbidden to speak or teach for 5 millennia. "This is Captain Sarah Chen of the Terran Federation ship Retribution, commanding the First Fleet of the Human Exile. We have returned to reclaim what was stolen from us. Galactic Council vessels, you are ordered to stand down and prepare for boarding. Resistance will be met with immediate termination." Silence filled the command center like a physical presence. Several junior officers exchanged glances of confusion and fear. The name human was known only to military historians and archaeologists. To most of the galaxy, they were a myth, a cautionary tale told to keep ambitious species in line. But Admiral Vexstar remembered the old stories his grandfather had told him. Stories passed down from those who had fought in the human war. Stories of ships that fought long after they should have been destroyed, of soldiers who kept coming even when mortally wounded, of a species that seemed to view death as merely an inconvenience.
Admiral, the communications officer's voice cracked slightly.
They're requesting immediate surrender of all Council forces in this sector. They're also demanding the current location of all Council world coordinates and... Sir, they want the names and locations of every Council member who voted for the final cleansing. Vexstar's 4 hands clenched into fists. If these really were humans, if they had somehow survived the complete destruction of their species, then their return could only mean one thing. They hadn't come back to negotiate or seek peaceful coexistence. They had come for revenge. Battle stations, he commanded, his voice carrying across the station's communication system. All ships prepare for combat. Send an immediate priority transmission to Council Central Command. Tell them... He paused, still not quite believing what he was about to say. Tell them the humans have returned. The holographic display updated as defensive systems came online throughout the sector. Weapons platforms powered up, shield generators began cycling to full strength, and patrol ships moved into attack formations. It was an impressive show of force, representing the military might of a galactic empire that had maintained peace and order for thousands of years. Against the approaching human fleet, it felt pathetically inadequate. The lead human ship, the Retribution, was massive beyond anything in the Council's current inventory. Early scans suggested it was nearly 15 kilometers long, its hull composed of materials that absorbed sensor readings like a black hole absorbed light. The ship's design was unlike anything in the database, angular and predatory, covered in weapon ports that seemed to track every Council vessel independently. Admiral, we're receiving additional transmissions from the human fleet, Yara reported, her blue skin now pale with fear. They're broadcasting on frequencies that shouldn't exist. Some kind of quantum entanglement communication system that bypasses our security entirely. What are they saying? They're reading names, sir. The names of every Council member who participated in the vote to destroy Earth. They know about classified sessions that were sealed 5,000 years ago. They have voting records that were supposed to be destroyed. A chill ran down Vexstar's spine. How could the humans have access to information that had been classified at the highest levels of Council security? Unless... Show me the crew manifest for every ship in their fleet. The holographic display shifted, showing detailed scans of the human vessels. What Vexstar saw made his blood freeze in his veins. The ships weren't just crewed by humans. There were other species aboard, species he recognized from the historical records. Delani traders who had been wiped out for selling weapons to human rebels. Corvin engineers who had been exterminated for helping humans develop faster-than-light communication. Therian scientists who had been eliminated for sharing advanced medical technology with human colonies. Dozens of species that the Council had declared extinct for the crime of cooperating with humanity. They were all there, aboard the human ships, alive, and apparently very angry. Dear gods, Vexstar whispered, how many species did we claim to wipe out completely? 47 sentient species were declared extinct during the Great Cleansing, sir. His aide replied automatically, accessing the historical database. All were eliminated for various degrees of collaboration with human forces. And if they're not actually extinct, the implications hit every being in the command center simultaneously. If the humans had survived, if their allies had survived, if the Great Cleansing had been incomplete, then the returning fleet represented more than just vengeance for one species. It represented the combined fury of nearly 50 civilizations that had been supposedly erased from existence. The communication system crackled to life again, this time with a different voice, speaking in perfectly accented Council standard. This is Admiral Martinez of the Terran Federation Navy. I want to speak directly to whoever is commanding Council forces in this sector. Vexstar hesitated for a moment, then activated the response channel. This is Admiral Vexstar, commanding the 4th Defensive Fleet. State your intentions. Our intentions should be obvious, Admiral. We've come to collect a debt that's been accumulating interest for 5,000 years, but I'm willing to make you a deal. What kind of deal? Surrender now, provide us with complete records of every Council member involved in the Great Cleansing, and we'll make sure your death is quick. Refuse, and we'll take apart your fleet piece by piece, keep your crews alive, and let them watch, while we do to your homeworlds what you did to ours. The transmission cut off, leaving the command center in absolute silence. Vextar stared at the approaching fleet, his mind racing through tactical options. The humans had 47 capital ships against his 12. They had unknown technology and what appeared to be superior firepower. They also had something else, something that might be even more dangerous than their weapons. They had nothing left to lose. "Sir?" Yaro's voice was barely above a whisper. "What are your orders?" Vextar looked around the command center at the faces of his crew. Young beings who had grown up in a galaxy where the Council's authority was absolute, where peace was maintained through the threat of overwhelming force, where the very idea of resistance had been bred out of most species through 5 millennia of careful social engineering. They had no idea what they were about to face. "Open a channel to all ships in the fleet," he commanded. "All vessels are to prepare for immediate withdrawal to the secondary defensive line. We're falling back to Council space." "Sir?" The communications officer looked confused. "Shouldn't we stand and fight? Our defensive position is strong, and Council doctrine clearly states." Council doctrine was written by beings who never had to face humans in combat. Vextar interrupted. "I've studied the historical records. I know what happened to the fleets that tried to stop them through conventional tactics. We're not retreating because we're cowards. We're retreating because we need time to warn the Council what's coming." As the Council fleet began its withdrawal, the human ships made no move to pursue. They simply continued on their original course, heading deeper into Council space at their impossible speed. It was almost as if they had expected the Council forces to run. Almost as if they wanted them to run. Vextar watched the human fleet disappear into the distance, and realized with growing horror that the humans weren't just returning to seek revenge. They were returning to finish a war that the Council thought had ended 5,000 years ago. And judging by the size of their fleet and the hatred in their voices, they had spent every one of those years preparing for this moment. The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened in the Great Chamber on Nexus Prime, the capital world that had served as the seat of galactic government for over 4,000 years. The massive spherical chamber could hold representatives from all 847 member species, though today only the High Council members were present. Their seats were arranged in concentric circles descending toward the central platform, where a holographic display showed the approaching human fleet in terrifying detail. High Chancellor Morden, an ancient Etherian whose species had founded the Council 6 millennia ago, struggled to maintain his composure as report after report confirmed the impossible. The humans were not only alive, they had returned with a fleet that dwarfed anything the Council had faced since the Great War against the Machine Collective 3,000 years ago. "The situation is unprecedented," announced General Kethvar, the Council's supreme military commander, and one of the few beings old enough to have actually fought humans during the original war. His scarred reptilian hide told the story of that conflict better than any historical document. "Our scouts report that the human fleet now numbers over 300 vessels, with more arriving hourly from unknown staging areas." Representative Zyla of the Crystalline Confederacy rose from her seat, her translucent form shimmering with nervous energy. "How is this possible? The historical records clearly state that all human worlds were completely sterilized. Every ship was tracked down and destroyed. We have documentation proving the complete extinction of their species." "Apparently," Mordun said dryly, "our documentation was incomplete." The chamber erupted in arguments as representatives demanded explanations. Accusations flew between military and civilian leadership, and panic began to set in among species that had never known anything but Council protection. Through it all, General Kethvar stood silently, his ancient eyes fixed on the tactical display. When the noise finally died down, he spoke in a voice that carried the weight of bitter experience. "I've been reviewing the old battle records, trying to understand how we could have missed entire populations. What I found disturbs me more than the prospect of another war." He manipulated the holographic controls, bringing up archived footage from the human conflict. The images showed massive space battles, burning colonies, and the systematic destruction of human worlds. But, as Kethvar highlighted specific details, a pattern began to emerge. "We assumed we were fighting a desperate species making its last stand. What we were actually fighting was a carefully orchestrated delaying action. Look at these evacuation patterns, these seemingly random ship movements, these failed colony attempts in deep space." The display zoomed in on one particular battle, showing human ships apparently fleeing in panic as Council forces overwhelmed their defenses. But when Kethvar slowed the footage and highlighted specific vectors, it became clear that the human ships weren't fleeing randomly. They were following precise courses that led toward the galactic edge. "They were buying time," he continued. "Every battle, every last stand, every act of apparently suicidal defiance was designed to keep our attention focused on the wars we were winning, while massive civilian populations escaped to staging areas beyond our sensor range. High Chancellor Mordem leaned forward in his throne. Are you suggesting that the humans planned their own extinction? I'm suggesting that the humans are the most tactically sophisticated species we've ever encountered, and we've spent 5,000 years underestimating them. They didn't just plan for the possibility of defeat, they planned for the possibility of return. A new voice echoed through the chamber as Admiral Vextar's emergency transmission reached the council. His image appeared above the central platform, his forearms gesticulating urgently as he delivered his report from the front lines. High Chancellor, the human advance has accelerated. They've established what appears to be a forward base in the Kepler sector and are broadcasting surrender demands to every council world within 50 light-years. They've also begun broadcasting something else. What else? Morden demanded. Historical records, sir. Detailed accounts of the Great Cleansing from the human perspective. They're transmitting to civilian populations on council worlds, showing them footage of the extinction campaigns, naming specific council members who authorized the killings, providing evidence of cover-ups and lies. The chamber fell silent. The Great Cleansing was taught in schools as a necessary action against a dangerous species that threatened galactic stability. The official histories portrayed it as a regrettable but unavoidable response to human aggression, carried out with minimal civilian casualties and focusing on military targets. The truth was rather different. They're trying to turn our own populations against us, observed Representative Thiss of the Merchant Coalition. If they can prove that the Council lied about the scope and nature of the human extinction, they can shatter the foundation of Council authority. Mordun finished grimly. 5,000 years of peace and stability, undone by ghosts returning from the dead. The holographic display updated as new intelligence reached the chamber. The human fleet had divided into multiple task forces, each heading toward different sectors of Council space. Their movements showed sophisticated knowledge of Council defenses, trade routes, and planetary positions. More disturbing were the intercepted communications between human ships. They weren't just planning military attacks. They were preparing for something that the Council military doctrine had never seriously considered.
A war of total extermination.
General Kethvar, Morden commanded, what are our defensive options? The old warrior's response was immediate and terrifying in its brevity. We have none. Explain. The humans have had 5,000 years to study our tactics, our technology, and our weaknesses, while remaining completely hidden from our surveillance. They know everything about us while we know nothing about them. They have superior numbers, superior technology, and something we've never faced before. Which is? A species with absolutely nothing to lose and 5 millennia of accumulated hatred to fuel them. As if summoned by his words, the communication system activated again. This time, the transmission came directly to the council chamber, bypassing every security protocol and encryption system as if they didn't exist. The figure that appeared on the main display was unmistakably human, though changed by centuries of life beyond Earth's destruction. Admiral Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of the Retribution, her uniform bearing symbols that no council database could identify. Behind her, the bridge crew worked with quiet efficiency, their faces marked by the same cold determination that had made humans so dangerous during the original war. High Chancellor Morden, she said, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber. I am Admiral Sarah Chen, commanding officer of the 1st Exile Fleet and designated speaker for the Terran Federation in exile. I have a message for you in the assembled council. Mordun rose slowly from his throne, his ancient form trembling slightly. Admiral Chen, I am prepared to discuss terms for a peaceful resolution to this situation. Chen's laugh was like breaking glass. Peaceful resolution? You destroyed our worlds, murdered our children, and spent 5,000 years celebrating our extinction. The time for peace ended when you decided that humanity didn't deserve to exist. The actions taken against your species were regrettable but necessary. Human expansion threatened the stability of... Stop. Chen's voice cut through the chamber like a blade. We know the truth. We have the records. We know about the secret meetings, the fabricated evidence, the systematic propaganda campaign designed to justify genocide. We know about the Etherian supremacy movement, the fear that young species might develop technologies that threatened your dominance, and the decision to make an example of humanity to keep other species in line. The chamber erupted in shocked murmurs. The existence of Etherian supremacist movements was one of the most closely guarded secrets in Council history, known only to the highest levels of government. How could you possibly know about? Mordun began, then stopped, as the implications hit him. How could we know about classified council records? How could we have access to information that was supposedly destroyed? Because, High Chancellor, you didn't kill all of us. Some humans survived in council space, hidden among your populations, working in your governments, serving in your militaries. They've been watching, waiting, and reporting back to us for 5,000 years. The revelation sent shockwaves through the assembled representatives. If humans had been living among them undetected for millennia, then everything they thought they knew about council security was a lie. We know about Project Silent Night, Chen continued, naming a black operation so secret that most council members had never heard of it. We know about the genocide protocols developed for other problematic species. We know about the contingency plans to eliminate the Corvin, the Therian, and the Delani if they became too independent. The only difference is that we were first. She gestured to someone off-screen, and the display split to show multiple human ship bridges. Each one was commanded by a different species, all of them supposedly extinct. Allow me to introduce some friends, Chen said. Captain Vortal of the Corvin Engineering Corps, Commander Thiska of the Delani Trading Fleet, Admiral Prendo of the Therian Science Division. 47 species that you claimed to have wiped out completely. 47 civilizations that have spent 5,000 years preparing for this moment. General Kethvar stepped forward. What do you want? Justice, Chen replied simply. Complete and total justice. We want every council member who participated in the Great Cleansing to face trial for their crimes. We want reparations for 5,000 years of stolen life. We want the council dissolved and replaced with a truly representative galactic government. And if we refuse? Chen's smile was colder than the space between stars. Then we'll take what we want by force. We've already begun liberating the Outer Rim worlds. Colonial populations are rising up against council authority as they learn the truth about your government. Your military response has been commissioned. Disappointing. The display updated to show the current tactical situation. In the 3 days since the human return, 17 council worlds had declared independence. 42 colonial governments had fallen to internal rebellions, and 3 entire fleet groups had simply vanished without trace.
How? Mordun whispered.
The same way we survived your genocide attempt, Chen answered. Careful planning, superior technology, and the kind of patience that only comes from having nothing left to lose. We've been preparing for this war longer than most of your species have existed. We've had time to plan, to build, to recruit, and to remember. She leaned forward, her eyes boring into the camera. You thought extinction was permanent, High Chancellor. You were wrong. Some things survive death itself. Hatred survives. Memory survives. And vengeance always, always survives. The transmission cut off, leaving the council chamber in absolute silence. High Chancellor Morden looked around at the assembled representatives, seeing fear in every face. These beings had grown up believing in the absolute power of the council, the certainty of their military supremacy, and the impossibility of any serious challenge to their authority. All of those beliefs had just died. General Kethvar, he said quietly, mobilize every fleet. Call up all reserves. Activate every defensive protocol we have. Yes, sir. What are we preparing for? Morden turned to stare at the tactical display, watching as more red dots appeared at the edge of council space. Each one represented a species that should have been extinct, ships that shouldn't exist, and warriors who had spent 50 centuries planning their revenge. The end of everything we've built, he answered, and the beginning of the most vicious war the galaxy has ever seen. The battle for Nexus Prime began without warning, as human ships materialized from hyperspace directly within the system's defensive perimeter. Admiral Chen had not been bluffing about their technological superiority. The human fleet possessed stealth capabilities that made mockery of every detection system the Council had developed over 5 millennia. Admiral Vextar commanded the defense from his flagship, the massive dreadnought Eternity's Edge, surrounded by the combined might of 7 Council fleets. Nearly 2,000 ships protected the capital world, representing the largest concentration of military power in galactic history. It should have been an impregnable defense. The humans tore through it like tissue paper. Report, Vextar bellowed, as his ship shuddered under impacts from weapons that shouldn't exist. Sir, we're reading impossible energy signatures from the human vessels. They're using some kind of quantum disruption weapons that bypass our shields entirely. The Etherian Third Fleet has lost 60% of its ships in the first wave. Through the main viewport, Vextar watched in horror as human fighters swarmed around Council capital ships like deadly insects. The fighters were impossibly fast and maneuverable, seeming to violate basic physics as they changed direction without inertia or executed turns that should have killed their pilots. But it wasn't just their technology that made them terrifying. It was their tactics. The humans weren't fighting to capture territory or achieve strategic objectives. They were fighting to kill everything that moved, to destroy every symbol of Council authority, and to send a message that would echo across the galaxy for generations. "Admiral, we're receiving a transmission from the human flagship," his communications officer reported. "Put it through." Admiral Chen's face appeared on the main screen, her expression calm despite the chaos of battle surrounding her ship. Behind her, the bridge crew worked with mechanical precision, calling out targeting solutions and tactical updates in voices devoid of emotion.
Admiral Vextar, I want you to understand what you're seeing.
This isn't a battle for military supremacy. This is an execution. You are witnessing the death of the Galactic Council and everything it represents. Admiral Chen, surely we can negotiate. Negotiate? Chen's voice carried a note of genuine surprise. Did you negotiate with the children on Colony 7 when you burned them alive? Did you negotiate with the civilians on New Terra when you poisoned their atmosphere? Did you offer terms to the refugees fleeing Earth when you hunted them down and slaughtered them in deep space? Vextar had no answer. The historical records were clear about the scope of the Great Cleansing, even if the full details had been classified for millennia. "We didn't come here to negotiate," Chen continued. "We came here to demonstrate the price of genocide. Every world that collaborated in our destruction will burn. Every species that cheered our extinction will face the same fate they celebrated." The transmission cut off as the human assault intensified. Massive ships that dwarfed even the largest Council dreadnoughts emerged from stealth, their hulls bristling with weapons that defied classification. They moved through the defensive lines with predatory grace, systematically destroying everything in their path. But the most terrifying sight was yet to come. As the main battle raged around Nexus Prime, smaller human ships began landing on the planet's surface. Not invasion transports or troop carriers, but something worse. The ships carried broadcast equipment, massive transmitters that began beaming a signal across every inhabited world in Council space, on 10,000 worlds, on space stations and colony ships, in the homes of civilians who had never heard a shot fired in anger. Holographic displays activated, unbidden. The signal bypassed every security protocol, every firewall, every attempt to block it, and what it showed changed the galaxy forever. It was archived footage from the human homeworlds during the Great Cleansing, recovered from sources the Council had thought destroyed. But these weren't sanitized military records or propaganda films. They were raw, unedited recordings of what had actually happened. Children running through burning streets while orbital bombardment turned their cities to ash. Families huddling in underground shelters as biological weapons slowly poisoned the air they breathed. Refugee ships full of civilians being hunted down and destroyed by Council forces, their distress calls ignored as they begged for mercy that never came. The galaxy watched as Council ships fired on hospitals, schools, and civilian evacuation centers. They saw the systematic extermination of an entire species, carried out with industrial efficiency and bureaucratic precision. They heard the recorded communications between Council commanders, discussing kill ratios and completion percentages as if they were talking about a construction project. And they heard the voices of the victims, preserved in emergency recordings and final transmissions. Mothers singing lullabies to children as poison gas filled their shelters. Fathers recording goodbye messages as their ships prepared to ram Council vessels in desperate final attacks. Scientists and artists, teachers and farmers, all of them dying for the crime of being human. The reaction was immediate and catastrophic. On the industrial world of Corvin Prime, factory workers abandoned their posts and marched on government buildings, demanding answers about why they had never been told the truth. On the peaceful agricultural colonies of the Therium Collective, civilians watched the broadcasts and realized that their own species had been marked for extinction by the same protocols that had killed humanity. And on Earth itself, something impossible happened. The planet that had been declared permanently uninhabitable began to show signs of life. Deep beneath the scarred surface, in caverns and bunkers that had been sealed for 5 millennia, automated systems activated in response to coded signals from the returning human fleet. Massive terraforming engines, built in secret during the final years of the war, began the slow process of healing a murdered world. But the most shocking revelation was yet to come. As human troops secured key installations on Nexus Prime, they discovered something that explained how the humans had obtained such detailed intelligence about Council operations. In the deepest levels of the government complex, past every security checkpoint, and behind barriers that should have been impregnable, They found a small office with a simple nameplate, Dr. Marcus Webb, historical consultant. Webb was human. He had worked for the Council for over 3,000 years, maintaining the false historical records about the human extinction, advising on xenoarchaeological projects, and helping to ensure that no trace of human civilization was ever discovered by accident. And all the while, he had been copying every document, recording every conversation, and transmitting intelligence to the exile fleets waiting beyond the galactic rim. 43 years I've worked in this building, he told Admiral Chen when she arrived to meet him personally. 43 years of listening to them congratulate themselves on a job well done. Do you know what the hardest part was? Tell me. Keeping my face neutral when they talked about how cleanly they had eliminated our species, how efficiently they had solved the human problem. How proud they were that future generations would never have to deal with our dangerous ideas. Chen studied the elderly human, noting the subtle signs of genetic modification that had allowed him to pass as a member of a different species for decades. How many others? Hundreds? We have people in every major government, every military command, every research facility. Your species taught us something valuable during the war, Admiral. Sometimes the best way to win is to let your enemy think they've already won. As the battle for Nexus Prime reached its conclusion, with Council forces either destroyed or in full retreat, the true scope of human preparations became clear. This wasn't just a military campaign. It was the culmination of a 5,000-year intelligence operation that had infiltrated every level of galactic society. The humans hadn't just survived, they had thrived, building a shadow civilization that existed alongside the Council worlds, invisible but ever-present, waiting for the moment of revelation. That moment had arrived. Across the galaxy, human agents revealed themselves. In government buildings and military installations, on trade stations and research facilities, beings who had lived their entire lives as loyal Council citizens suddenly stood up and declared their true allegiance. The effect was psychological as much as strategic. Every species in the galaxy suddenly realized that their governments had been compromised, their security was an illusion, and their most trusted advisors might be working for an enemy they had thought was extinct. But the humans weren't finished. As news of the fall of Nexus Prime spread throughout Council space, Admiral Chen issued a new proclamation that was broadcast on every communication channel in the galaxy. Citizens of the former Galactic Council, your leaders lied to you. They told you that we were dangerous aggressors who threatened galactic peace. They told you that our extinction was necessary for your safety. They told you that the price of stability was the complete elimination of troublesome species. Today, you've seen the truth. You've seen what your government is capable of when it decides that a species is inconvenient. You've seen the machinery of genocide that your taxes funded, your representatives authorized, and your military carried out. And now you have a choice. You can continue to support a system that views sentient life as expendable, that maintains order through the threat of extinction, and that has lied to you about the most fundamental questions of right and wrong. Or you can help us build something better. The transmission ended with coordinates, meeting points where any being who wanted to join the human cause could make contact with representatives of the exile government. Within hours, thousands of ships were converging on those coordinates, carrying refugees, defectors, and volunteers from across the galaxy. The Galactic Council had maintained order for 5,000 years through the careful application of overwhelming force and the cultivation of species too comfortable with peace to question authority. They had created a stable, prosperous civilization that worked perfectly as long as no one asked uncomfortable questions about its foundations. The humans had returned to ask those questions with extreme prejudice. As Admiral Vextar's battered fleet limped away from Nexus Prime, carrying the remnants of Council authority to whatever safe haven they could find, he couldn't shake the feeling that the galaxy would never be the same. The humans hadn't just won a battle. They had shattered the illusion of Council supremacy that had kept thousands of species in line for millennia. And judging by the reports streaming in from across Council space, that illusion was the only thing that had been holding the galactic government together. The age of the Council was ending. What would replace it remained to be seen. 6 months after the fall of Nexus Prime, the galaxy was unrecognizable. The Galactic Council had fractured into dozens of competing factions, each claiming to represent legitimate authority while controlling steadily shrinking territories. Some tried to maintain the old order through increasingly brutal suppression of dissent. Others attempted to distance themselves from the crimes of the past by forming new governments with reformed constitutions and humanitarian principles. None of it mattered to the humans. Admiral Chen stood in the command center of New Terra Station, a massive construction that had been assembled in the asteroid fields where Earth's moon had once orbited. Through the transparent aluminum windows, she could see the planet below, its surface slowly healing under the ministrations of terraforming technology that made council engineering look primitive by comparison. The station itself was a marvel that defied every assumption about human capabilities, built entirely from materials mined in deep space, using methods the council had never imagined. It represented 5,000 years of technological development, freed from the constraints of galactic politics. The humans had not merely survived their exile, they had evolved. Status report, Chen commanded, turning to address the multi-species crew that operated the station's command systems. Humans worked alongside Corvin engineers, Therian scientists, and Delani navigators, all of them united by shared experience of council persecution and a common desire for justice. The liberation of Sector 15 is complete, reported Captain Corvash, a massive reptilian whose species had been declared extinct for the crime of developing weapons capable of threatening Council capital ships. Local defense forces surrendered without significant resistance. That makes 47 sectors now under Liberation Authority control. Resistance movements on Council loyalist worlds continue to expand, added Dr. Kerr. Dala, a Therian whose people had supposedly been wiped out for sharing advanced medical technology with human colonies. Our broadcasts have reached 93% of inhabited worlds. Popular support for the old regime is collapsing faster than their ability to maintain order. Chen nodded, studying the holographic display that showed the current state of galactic politics. Green areas represented territory under Liberation Authority control, red showed remaining Council loyalist regions, and yellow marked contested systems where civil wars raged between rival factions. The map was mostly green, but military victory had never been the point. The humans could have simply exterminated every Council world, turned the galaxy into a lifeless wasteland, and called it justice. Instead, they had chosen a more complex path, one that required patience, precision, and a level of moral sophistication that the Council had never credited them with. They were rebuilding galactic civilization from the ground up. Any word from the diplomatic missions? Chen asked. The Centauri Federation has officially joined the Liberation Authority, reported Ambassador Singh, one of the few humans who had lived openly among the exile fleets. That brings our total membership to 87 species and 412 worlds. The Vegan Trade Alliance is considering a similar arrangement. Chen permitted herself a small smile. The Liberation Authority wasn't just a military alliance, it was the framework for a new kind of galactic government, one based on voluntary association rather than imposed dominance. Every species that joined did so freely, after detailed negotiations about rights, responsibilities, and mutual obligations. It was everything the Council claimed to be but had never actually achieved. The irony was lost on no one.
Ma'am,
Interrupted Lieutenant Torres from the communications station. We're receiving a priority transmission from Admiral Reyes aboard the Salvation. She's requesting immediate conference for what she calls a development you need to see personally. Chen frowned. Admiral Reyes commanded the Second Exile Fleet, currently operating in the former Council core worlds. If she was calling for an emergency conference, it meant something significant had happened. Put her through. The main display activated, showing the bridge of a ship that was clearly in the middle of a combat zone. Admiral Reyes appeared on screen, her uniform bearing the scars of recent fighting, her expression grim. Sarah, we have a problem. A big one. What kind of problem? The kind that might force us to reconsider our entire strategy. We've just finished liberating the Altair system, and among the captured records, we found something that changes everything. Chen felt a chill of apprehension. Show me. The display shifted to show classified documents bearing the highest levels of Council security clearance. As Chen read the contents, her blood turned cold. The documents detailed something called Protocol Omega, a contingency plan developed in the decades following the human extinction. The plan was simple, elegant, and utterly terrifying in its scope. If the Council ever faced an existential threat that conventional military forces couldn't handle, they would activate pre-positioned weapon systems on every major world in the galaxy. Not just Council worlds, but every inhabited planet, every space station, every colony that contained significant populations. The weapons were biological in nature, designed to sterilize all complex life while leaving infrastructure intact. According to the documents, they had been secretly installed over the course of thousands of years, hidden in routine construction projects, disguised as civilian systems, and maintained by automated processes that required no ongoing human oversight. The activation codes were held by a small group of Council leaders who had survived the fall of Nexus Prime and were now hiding somewhere in the Outer Rim territories. How many worlds? Chen asked, though she dreaded the answer. Every inhabited system in the former Council space, Reyes replied. According to these documents, over 10,000 worlds are wired with sterilization charges. If they activate Protocol Omega, they can commit galactic genocide at the push of a button, Chen finished, killing everything that moves and leaving empty worlds for whoever survives to recolonize. The implications were staggering. The Council leaders, faced with the collapse of their empire, could choose to destroy galactic civilization rather than allow their enemies to inherit it. It was the ultimate expression of the same mentality that had led to the human extinction. If they couldn't control something, they would destroy it. Do we know where the activation codes are being held? Intelligence suggests a mobile command platform operating in the void reaches, but we haven't been able to get a precise location. The platform uses the same stealth technology we've been deploying, which means they learned it from studying our infiltrators over the centuries, Chen concluded. They've been watching us as carefully as we've been watching them. It was a sobering reminder that the Council hadn't remained static during the 5,000 years since the human exile. They had learned, adapted, and prepared for contingencies that included the return of species they thought they had exterminated. Chen turned to address her command staff. How long would it take to locate and neutralize the sterilization charges? Dr. Thala consulted her data tablets rapidly. The charges are designed to be undetectable by conventional sensors and resistant to standard disarmament procedures. Even if we could find them all, neutralizing 10,000 separate weapon systems would take decades. And if they activate before we can stop them, Galactic extinction event. Every complex life form dies within 72 hours. The only survivors would be whoever happens to be in deep space with closed atmospheric systems. Chen stared at the tactical display, watching the slow progress of Liberation Authority forces throughout the galaxy. Every green dot represented worlds full of innocent civilians who had no idea they were living on top of instruments of their own destruction. The humans had returned to seek justice for genocide. Now they faced the possibility of preventing an even greater genocide, one that would dwarf the human extinction in scope and horror. Ma'am, Captain Korvash spoke up. There may be another option. Explain. Our intelligence networks include agents embedded in the surviving Council command structure. It's possible we could locate the activation platform through those sources, but it would require exposing assets we've spent millennia developing, Chen finished. People who have sacrificed everything to provide us with information would be revealed and certainly killed. Yes, ma'am. The question is whether we're willing to sacrifice our own people to save populations that include many who would have cheerfully participated in our continued extinction. It was the central moral dilemma of the entire liberation campaign. The humans had every right to seek vengeance against those who had wronged them, but they also had the power to save species that had never done anything worse than fail to resist an evil government. Chen made the decision that would define the rest of the war. Contact all embedded assets. Begin preparation for exposure burns. We'll sacrifice our intelligence networks to locate and neutralize the activation platform. Ma'am, Dr. Thala said quietly, you realize this means abandoning any chance of tracking down the individual council members responsible for the original genocide? Our asset network is the only way we could ever identify and prosecute the specific beings who ordered our extinction. I know, Chen replied. But preventing a galactic holocaust is more important than settling old scores. The dead of Earth will have to be satisfied with the knowledge that their sacrifice prevented something even worse. As orders went out to human agents across the galaxy, Chen reflected on the bitter irony of the situation. The humans had returned seeking vengeance, only to find themselves in the position of having to save the very species that had celebrated their extinction. But perhaps that was the point. Perhaps the real victory wasn't in matching Council cruelty with human brutality, but in demonstrating that even after 5,000 years of exile and suffering, humanity could still choose mercy over revenge when the stakes were high enough. As Admiral Reyes signed off and the command center buzzed with activity, Chen looked out at the slowly healing Earth and wondered if her ancestors would understand the choice she had just made. She decided they would. After all, the desire to protect innocent life was what had made humans dangerous to the Council in the first place. The hunt for the Council's mobile command platform lasted 3 weeks and cost the lives of over 200 human agents who had spent centuries building identities, relationships, and trust within enemy organizations. Each exposure led to the next piece of intelligence. Each sacrifice brought the Liberation Authority closer to preventing the ultimate genocide. Admiral Chen stood in the war room aboard the Retribution, surrounded by holographic displays showing the final phase of Operation Redemption. The Council's stealth platform had been located in the void reaches, just as intelligence had suggested, but finding it and destroying it were very different challenges. Target confirmed, reported Captain Martinez from the sensor station. The platform is using adaptive stealth technology that mirrors our own capabilities. It's approximately 15 kilometers long and appears to be heavily armed. Defensive escort? Chen asked. Minimal. 3 heavy cruisers and a squadron of fighters. They're maintaining radio silence and running dark, but our quantum sensors can track their gravitational signatures. Chen studied the tactical display, noting the platform's position relative to the galactic disk. The Council had chosen their hiding spot well. The void reaches were empty space between spiral arms, where normal sensor sweeps would never detect anything smaller than a rogue planet. But the humans had advantages the Council had never anticipated. Admiral! Communications Officer Wright looked up from her station. We're receiving a transmission from the command platform. It's High Chancellor Morden himself. Put him through. The ancient Etherian's image appeared on the main screen, his transparent form flickering with what Chen recognized as suppressed rage. Behind him, she could see the command center of the stealth platform, with council officers working frantically at control stations. Admiral Chen, Mordoon began without preamble. I assume you're here to prevent the activation of Protocol Omega. That's correct. Surrender the activation codes and we'll consider allowing you to face trial rather than summary execution. Morden's laugh was like crystal breaking. Trial? You speak of trials after destroying half the galaxy's government and military forces, after broadcasting propaganda that has turned our own populations against us, after systematically dismantling 5,000 years of civilized order? We spoke of justice, Chen corrected. Something your council never understood. Justice. Mordan repeated the word as if tasting something bitter. Do you know what justice looks like to me, Admiral? Justice is ensuring that if the Council falls, the galaxy falls with it. Justice is making certain that no other species will ever benefit from our destruction. You're talking about murdering trillions of innocent beings. Innocent? Mordan's form blazed brighter. Where were these innocent beings when humanity was being exterminated? Where were their protests, their demands for mercy, their calls for investigation? They were silent because they were comfortable, well-fed, and happy to let someone else handle the messy work of maintaining order. Chen felt a familiar anger rising in her chest, the same cold fury that had sustained her through 50 centuries of exile. But she forced it down, remembering the choice she had made weeks ago. Their silence doesn't justify their extinction, doesn't it? You humans always claimed to be morally superior to the rest of us. You insisted that individual conscience mattered more than collective stability. Well, here's your chance to prove it. Stand down your forces, return to whatever dark corner of space you've been hiding in, and accept that the age of human influence is over. Or, I activate Protocol Omega and demonstrate that the Council's final act will be the greatest public service in galactic history. The complete extinction of every species currently living, making room for new forms of life that might prove more worthy of civilization. The transmission cut off, leaving the bridge in tense silence. Chen turned to her tactical officer. What's our weapon status? All systems armed and ready. We can disable their platform before they complete an activation sequence, but? The activation process has already begun. Our agents inside the platform report that Morden started the countdown as soon as we arrived in the system. We have approximately 6 hours before the sterilization charges on every inhabited world go active simultaneously. 6 hours to save a galaxy that had cheered humanity's extinction. Chen closed her eyes and made the hardest decision of her long life. Signal all Liberation Authority forces. Begin immediate assault on the command platform. Maximum firepower, minimum delay. We're going in. The battle for the fate of galactic civilization lasted exactly 47 minutes. The Council's escort vessels fought with the desperate fury of beings who knew they were defending the last remnant of their empire. They threw themselves against the human fleet with suicidal determination, buying time for their leaders to complete the activation sequence that would render their defeat meaningless. But they were fighting technology that had been refined through 5,000 years of exile, wielded by species that had learned to work together through shared suffering and common purpose. The human ships moved with predatory grace through the defensive formations, their weapon systems targeting specific vulnerabilities that no Council engineer had ever anticipated. The stealth platform itself proved more challenging. Its defensive systems included weapons that seemed to violate known physics, energy fields that absorbed incoming fire and redirected at attacking vessels, and armor composed of materials that grew stronger under stress. It took the combined firepower of 7 human dreadnoughts to crack the platform's hull. Admiral Chen led the boarding action personally, fighting through corridors filled with automated defenses and die-hard Council loyalists who would rather die than surrender their genocidal ambitions. The platform's interior was a maze of command centers, power nodes, and communication arrays, all designed to coordinate the most elaborate murder weapon in galactic history. They found High Chancellor Mordun in the primary command center, standing before a control console that showed countdown timers for every inhabited world in the galaxy. Many of the timers had already reached zero, indicating that sterilization charges on those worlds had received their activation signals. "Too late," Mordun said without turning around. "The signal has been sent to 60% of the target worlds. In less than 2 hours, those populations will begin dying. Within 72 hours, they will all be dead." Chen raised her weapon, then hesitated. "There has to be a way to reverse the signal." "There is." Mordun finally turned to face her, his transparent features showing something that might have been satisfaction. "A counter-signal that can neutralize the biological agents before they reach lethal concentrations. But it requires the personal authorization codes of the High Chancellor." "Then provide them." "Why would I do that?" "So you can continue to destroy everything I've spent my life building." "So the galaxy can descend into chaos and barbarism under the rule of species too young to understand the necessities of governance?" Chen stepped closer, her weapon aimed at Mordun's center mass. "Because otherwise, you'll be responsible for the greatest act of genocide in galactic history. And unlike the human extinction, this one will have no survivors to carry forward the memory of the dead." Mordun considered this for a long moment. Around them, the sounds of battle continued as human forces secured the rest of the platform and began shutting down automated systems. "You know," he said finally, "I've been thinking about what you said earlier. About justice. Perhaps there is a form of justice in this situation after all." "What do you mean?" "I mean that the galaxy will survive, but it will be forever changed. Every species that lives through this day will know that their existence depends on the mercy of humans. They will know that you had the power to stand aside and let them die, but chose to save them instead." He moved to the command console and began entering codes. "They will spend the rest of their history wondering whether they deserve the life you're giving them. Whether they would have made the same choice in your position. Whether they are worthy of the mercy you've shown." The timers on the display began turning green as counter-signals reached their destinations across the galaxy. "It's a cruel kind of justice," Mordun continued. "To force an entire galaxy to live with the knowledge of their own moral inadequacy. To make them confront the fact that the species they tried to exterminate proved more civilized than they were." Chen watched the last timer turn green, indicating that the sterilization threat had been neutralized across all inhabited worlds. Trillions of beings who would never know how close they had come to death would wake up tomorrow to a galaxy transformed. "Why?" she asked. "Why save them at the end?" Mordun's form began to flicker as his life support systems failed. "Because you were right about one thing, Admiral. Individual conscience does matter more than collective stability. And my conscience tells me that the Council's greatest crime wasn't destroying humanity. It was failing to live up to the ideals we claim to represent." He collapsed, his energy form dissipating into random photons as his consciousness faded. Admiral Chen stood in the command center of the defeated enemy, surrounded by the wreckage of 5,000 years of galactic order, and tried to comprehend what they had accomplished. The humans had returned for vengeance and found themselves dispensing mercy. They had sought justice for their own extinction and ended up preventing a far greater genocide. They had planned to tear down the Galactic Council and discovered they would have to build something better to replace it. 6 months later, Admiral Chen stood in the assembly hall of New Geneva Station, watching as representatives from nearly 1,000 species signed the Galactic Liberation Charter. The document established the framework for a new kind of civilization, one based on voluntary cooperation, mutual respect, and the hard-learned knowledge that the strong have responsibilities as well as privileges. It wasn't perfect. Nothing involving so many different species and cultures could be perfect, but it was honest about its imperfections, transparent about its limitations, and committed to the principle that no species should have the power to determine whether another species deserved to exist. The human delegation sat in the front row, not as conquerors or liberators, but as equals among equals. They had given up their advantage in technology and military power, sharing their knowledge freely with any species that wanted it. They had disbanded their exile fleets and integrated their forces with the new Liberation Authority Navy. They had even established a Truth and Reconciliation Commission to investigate their own actions during the Liberation Campaign, determined to hold themselves to the same standards they demanded of others. As the ceremony concluded, and the representatives began filing out to begin the long work of building a new galactic order, Admiral Chen found herself approached by Dr. Marcus Webb, the human agent who had spent decades working within the Council bureaucracy. "Any regrets?" he asked quietly. Chen considered the question seriously. About preventing the genocide? None. About exposing our intelligence networks? None. About showing mercy to the species that celebrated our extinction? She paused, looking out through the station's windows at the ships carrying representatives back to their homeworlds. Back to populations that would have to learn to live in a galaxy where humans existed again. Ask me in 100 years, she said finally. When we see what kind of civilization grows from the seeds we've planted. Doctor, Webb nodded. The children of Earth would be proud of what we've accomplished. Would they? We had the power to burn the galaxy clean and start over. Instead, we chose to save the species that failed to save us. That's exactly why they would be proud, Webb replied. Because in the end, we proved that we really were different from the Council. We proved that the ideals they died for weren't just noble words. They were principles worth living by. As Admiral Chen watched the last transport depart for the former Council worlds, carrying the news that the galaxy had been reborn, she allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. The humans had returned from extinction to find that their greatest victory wasn't conquering their enemies, but becoming worthy of the legends that would be told about them for generations to come. The age of vengeance was over. The age of redemption had begun. And somewhere in the healing Earth's slowly recovering ecosystem, in the new forests growing where cities had once burned, life was learning to trust in tomorrow again. The galaxy would remember many things about humanity's return. Their impossible survival, their advanced technology, their military prowess, and their long-delayed justice. But perhaps most importantly, it would remember their choice to be merciful when mercy was neither expected nor deserved. That choice would echo through galactic history for millennia to come. A reminder that true strength lies not in the power to destroy, but in the wisdom to know when destruction serves no purpose but vanity. The humans had taught the galaxy a lesson it would never forget. That even extinction is not permanent when it comes to species that understand the difference between justice and revenge. And in the end, that difference had saved them all.